was silence. Kia ora koutou katoa. E te mana whenua o nai tūhurihi tēnā koutou. E nā pukenga, e nā ahorangi, e nā hauamā. Tēnā koutou katoa. Nā mai haere mai ki te kura umanga. E mai ana te whakatoki ma te huruhuru ka rere te manu. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Ballantyne, and I'm the Executive Dean of the University of Canterbury Business School, and it's my absolute privilege to welcome you all here tonight for this Thought Leadership Series event. In terms of my mihi at the start, I was acknowledging the Mana Tribal Authority over this land here in Canterbury, the local sub-tribe Ngāi Tuarehi, and the local of the tribal group Ngāi Tahu. To our professors, to our students, and to the friends of the business school, welcome. And the whakatoki I used roughly translates as knowledge empowers us as the adornment of feathers enables a bird to fly, which I've always loved for events like this, because one of the reasons for us coming together to learn from the experts who are going to be on stage is hopefully everyone leaving here tonight, there's a bit more knowledge that has been gained that hopefully benefits them as you go on into the coming days, weeks, months and years. The UC Business School's Thought Leadership Series is a platform designed to share insights from leading experts, academics and industry leaders on pressing topics, often with a focus on contemporary challenges, future trends and innovations. These events aim to engage public, business professionals and students in thought-provoking discussions that inspire ideas, foster collaboration and showcase research. Typically, speakers present on topics relevant to fields like technology, sustainability, resilience, business strategy, education and social impact, creating a valuable networking opportunity for attendees interested in staying informed about industry developments and intellectual advancements. The UC Business School has extensive connections to business and community organisations, and we've been recognised and accredited by the three main international business school accreditation bodies, which are shown on the slide up there. That includes AACSB, Equus, and in the case of one of our speakers tonight, Elsamari, for the MBA, Amber. This means that we have achieved the prestigious Triple Crown of Business School accreditations that places us in the top 1% of business schools in the world. Now, I just want to give a little bit of an update about some of what has been happening in the business school before introducing the speakers for tonight. So the first one, the UC Business School team recently won the MBA National Case Competition for 2024. 4 students are up there. It is the second time in 3 years that an MBA team from the University of Canterbury Business School has won this award. So well done to all of those involved with that achievement. In terms of some other happenings and some other news from the business school, within the past year we achieved an international label, BSIS. If you lead a business school you get used to a lot of acronyms. So BSIS stands for Business School Impact System. Now the one which is nice about that is we're the first business school in Australasia to achieve this label, which covers, as I've got up there, 120 indicators across 7 dimensions which are listed. But the big one for us with this award is really addressing this issue as a school, how are we having an impact upon society across a range of dimensions? And for events like this tonight, this is a way of bringing the business school and the university into the city, where, as I say, hopefully there's a number of takeaways tonight for people in the audience. We've also achieved some recent success. So there was the Aotearoa Business and Economics Research Translation Competition. There was a ceremony for that in the past couple of weeks. So in the early career researcher category, we had a winner, Dr. Ksenia Zarai from our Department of Management, Marketing and Tourism, and a runner-up from the same department, Dr. Nadira Ranabahu. So 2 of our early career faculty doing incredibly well on the national stage. Also in the same area about impact and research excellence, Professor Lucio Zan from Management, Marketing and Tourism has been given Advancing Sustainable Research Award for her work on environmentally motivated consumption behaviour. And in terms of advancing bicultural competency, which is one of the areas of focus for our business school, Dr. Matthew Scobie has recently been awarded the 2024 UC Early and Emerging Career Researcher Award, and has also recently published a book entitled The Economic Possibilities of Decolonisation. Now, one of the ones before getting on to tonight, I just want to give a little bit of an overview about what we're doing under the umbrella of what we loosely call professional and industry programs. So, just to give you an overview of some recent short courses which have taken place. So empowerment through delegation, learning to use AI, which is an incredibly hot topic these days, and I know Elsamari is probably going to be talking a little bit about AI soon. Project management, and another one of our panellists tonight, Carl Davidson, on critical thinking and management, and the masterclass on that one. We have some upcoming programs that might also be of interest too. So we've got a Critical Thinking Management Masterclass on the 11th of November. Thinking Like a Futurist is coming up. A Generative AI Bootcamp coming up. Negotiation skills and applied decision making. So these are all short courses that we're offering between now and the end of the year. And if you are interested in more information, there's an email address there for Lisa Jones, who is also in the front row, who will be out in the foyer later if you're wanting to talk to her. A final one I'm just wanting to draw some attention to as well is the university is going to be in the city again on Monday night. There is an event which we call UC Ignite, and this one is more around the Faculty of Engineering and talking about their new strategy and the way that engineering is going to be contributing to the future, well, both current and future economic growth of the city and how it's going to work with local organisations and so on. If you are interested, grab your phone, pull it out. There's the QR code that is there, so I'll pause for that. I do see a few phones out, which is good. I will pause. So RSVP by the 10th of November if you are interested. That's starting at a similar time to the event tonight and just across the road at the town hall. So I will be there too because I'll be actually leading the panel discussion that night. So I might see you again in a few days' time. So we will go on to talking a little bit more about the event in terms of the topic and the format for tonight. The topic we're addressing tonight is focused on navigating change. And when are we not navigating change? In an era of unprecedented change, New Zealand's business landscape is undergoing a radical transformation. The panel discussion we're having tonight is intended to equip forward-thinking leaders with the insights and strategies needed to thrive in the evolving world of work. The panel discussion is going to discuss trends that are redefining organisations and work in New Zealand today, and key learnings from how organisations have responded to these changes. From the rise of AI to shifts in workforce dynamics, our experts who are soon going to be on stage will explore how leaders can anticipate and navigate these changes to future-proof their organisations. So to give you a little bit of idea of the format tonight, we have got 4 presenters as part of the panel. Now, each of the presenters has got about 5 to 7 minutes to present. And the order of the presentations is going to be Murray Strong, Tracey Cotter-Martin, Carl Davidson and Elsamari Botha. And then Elsamari, the final speaker, is going to be leading the discussion and the Q&A from the stage. But what I want to do before that is just give a brief introduction to each of our 4 speakers tonight. So the first person we'll be hearing from is Murray Strong, an independent chairman and director, speaker and board advisor. Murray has served on 23 boards of directors, 18 as chairman. Those boards have been for companies, crown entities, incorporated societies, large infrastructure projects, digital transformation programs and statutory interventions as Crown Commissioner. He has served as the chair of boards and directors continuously since 2001. His approach is characterised by recognising good practice no matter where it lives, and scaling it and replicating it. His style of leadership is to draw together seemingly disparate skills, functions and activities and resources to develop new ways of working. In addition, this approach allows the development of elegant and practical solutions to seemingly complex problems and supports those with the executive responsibility to deliver on organisational strategies and plans. Our second speaker is going to be Tracey Cotter-Martin, Associate Director, Optimisation and Innovation from Datacom. So Tracey, in terms of background, is recognised for her expertise in bringing innovation and new ways of thinking to the workplace. With her extensive experience in strategy, consultation and big picture thinking, Tracey is uniquely positioned to share her insights on how harnessing digital disruption can ensure tomorrow's workforce is future fit. Tracey's passion for understanding the external factors that influence the way we work has earned her accolades, including the 2022 Reseller Newswoman in ICT Awards, Innovation Award. She is committed to building empathetic working environments that enable individuals and organisations to thrive in today's ever-changing landscape. Third speaker is Carl Davidson, Head of Insights at Truwind Research First. Carl is an insights professional with the social scientist's heart. He is currently the Head of Insights at Truwind Research First, and he has over 30 years' experience in the insights industry. In addition to this, Carl has written a number of books about research and applying evidence in decision-making. He also works as a Senior Adjunct Fellow at the University of Canterbury's Business School and is a presenter for the Marketing Association. In 2023, Carl was made a Fellow of the Research Association of New Zealand and named as a Global Insight 250 winner. And our final speaker, Elsamari Botha, AI and Digital Transformation Specialist, and I'm very proud to say I'm the best MBA Director in the country, and also our MBA Director of the UC Business School. Els, as I said, is our MBA Director and an extraordinary Associate Professor at the University of Stellenbosch Business School. With 15 years of consulting experience and experience assisting from small businesses to large corporates, Elsamari's research focuses on adopting and monetising new technologies in organisations and digital strategy development focusing on artificial intelligence. With a PhD in Industrial Economics and Management from KTH, Royal Institute of Technology, Stockholm, Elsamari has published in leading international journals. She has also been recognised as a LinkedIn top voice in both higher education and consulting, and has various advisory and governance positions. So a pretty phenomenal group of speakers tonight and panel that we will hear from soon. But to start things off, as I said, I will hand things over to Murray Strong. Murray.
We were joking before we got going this afternoon, and I thought I might just stand up here on stage and say, how about the US election, and go and sit down. But I guess in some ways what it does, it brings into pretty sharp relief some of the areas that I want to cover off with you this afternoon. So I am unashamedly speaking from a board and C-suite perspective, having, as Paul has mentioned, been operating in that space for a little while now. And there are no shortage of trends for directors to be across and in terms of responding to them. Probably too many for 5 to 7 minutes, but I've bundled them generally into 3 broad categories and we'll whistle through them pretty quickly. Those who operate around board tables and in C-suites are starting to face increasing scrutiny from a bunch of places: shareholders, the market, consumers, staff, and regulators. And we're expected to be doing more with less and doing it faster, which probably sounds reasonably similar to the way that your expectations are in your organisations. And the market challenges and the speed of change require a different mindset from directors. And in my personal experience, strategic mindsets are weaker in periods of rapid change. Survival becomes the principal area of focus for organisations, and you need to remind yourselves to get out of that as you start to lead into a transformation space. So the first bundle then is loosely based on Jim Carville's 1992 quote to Bill Clinton's campaign group getting ready for that election. And it's all about the economy, stupid, were his words. The other two, as a matter of interest, were change versus more of the same, which we've heard a little bit about across a number of democracies and elections during the course of 2024. And don't forget about healthcare. And both of those things are going to come up a little bit over the next few minutes. So the economy, there is economic uncertainty at a system level. And that manifests itself in a number of ways within organisations, and there are a number of contributing factors to that. A lack of policy clarity from central government sits right at the top of that list for me. And a non-partisan, mature conversation around the future economic engine for New Zealand sits as a very close second. That isn't helped by flip-flop policy changes in core public services, health, education and infrastructure. And these changes damage confidence and security for businesses and investors alike. And it doesn't matter the size or scale of your organisation, these things are becoming clear and present and require our attention. And sensible discussions regarding infrastructure necessarily begin with the question, well, why are we building it? And if we don't have clarity on the future economic engine of the country, then it becomes a difficult question to ask, and the result is probably going to be a wasteful one. And then, while not particular to central or local government, there's the manifestation of that uncertainty in organisations and what that looks like. In my experience, that's characterised by organisations not making the hard decisions, not making the decisions to disinvest, not making the decisions to reallocate resource, and the recognition of true cost. And those things, when they're combined, result in spurious resource scarcity. Like you don't have a glass of wine before I tried to say that this afternoon. But again, if pet projects, outdated legacy systems, and business practices were removed, resources magically appear. They are actually there. We just need to go digging for them and finding them. And sometimes running that scarcity line suits an anti-change narrative. And often it can signal a lack of courage about having those really, really difficult conversations within your organisations. And then globally, again, think the US election this week and the UK elections earlier in the year. And of the other 108 democracies across the globe, 92 of them are having elections in 2024. So there is going to be significant change and a little bit of uncertainty coming, let alone the other 59 authoritarian regimes and those bad state actors with wars going on across 3 continents in 9 separate scenarios. And combined, all of these factors result in a fraught and muddled investment landscape, which for us as business owners and operators can make life increasingly challenging. So from a government perspective, government needs to find the way, describe the way, then get the hell out of the way. Governments don't run economies, government runs parliament. The economy is run by businesses, investors, entrepreneurs, you as business leaders, and your staff. And for boards need to do the same. They need to find the way, describe the way, and get out of the way, and let the executive, who are charged with responsibility for delivering value and creating shareholder wealth, to get on with the jobs that they have at the same time. The second bundle is a focus on sustainability and environmental, social and governance practices. There's an increasing amount of pressure coming on from consumers, investors and regulators that's pushing companies to adopt a different set of policies and approaches to governance. And it's a good thing too. There's been a little bit of mystery around some of this sort of stuff. It's not that hard. But with the ubiquitous nature of information these days, the determination of what is true becomes challenging, but more people have the ability to access that information about us. Emergent business strategy is another one of those things that's wrapped up in this bundle. The strategic timeframes are shortening, and the advancements in technology are making sure that those decision-making windows are getting even smaller and smaller and smaller. So having a fast-moving and agile business is going to be a hallmark of future success. In real terms, those shortening timeframes have significant impacts. In the 1920s, the average Fortune 500 company was on that list for about 67 years. In the 1970s, they were on that list for between 30 and 35 years, and now it's about 15. There's one falling off every 2 weeks. So you can see the rapid turnover and the advancement in technology and the changes that's having on what you would normally classify as sound and sustainable organisations. And wrapped up in that is that as those timeframes shorten, the risk of failure increases. So boards are concerning themselves with these sorts of questions. But in order to do that, they need to be very clear on what their and their shareholders' appetite for risk is. And having grown up mature conversations about risk can provide a very, very good touchstone for future investment decisions. And the three principal variables of success, time, cost, and quality, ring true here, recognising, of course, that you can only have two of the three at the same time. It's very, very uncommon for you to have the three. So the trade-offs, the decisions that are being made are critical. And I talk often when I'm speaking to boards about the three Russian cousins, more of, less of, and none of. And you really need to have a conscious decision about disinvesting, reallocation of resource, and what you think the future is going to look like. And then the third bundle is talent attraction and retention. Post-COVID, our talent pool in New Zealand has been hollowed out. And you will be seeing this in your organisations. We're finding it increasingly difficult to get the talent and the future leaders that we need. So the development of human capital is critical to the success of New Zealand, and our workforce is our most valuable asset. Investments in education, skills development, and healthcare are essential to creating a knowledgeable and healthy population to boost productivity and be capable of innovation and high-quality work. As an economic input, a productive workforce adapts to changes in technology and the global markets and stimulates its own market-driven growth and sustainability. The circular nature of that growth enables government revenue to increase and again further investment in the success factors for New Zealand. So, I can already see from down here that some of those comments have garnered a little bit of a reaction, not least of which the opening one about the US election, Carl. But I will see you again for the Q&A. Thanks for listening.
Kia ora koutou, ko Tracey Cotter-Martin, tōku ingoa, ko Associate Director Optimisation Innovation, tōku mahi ana. But I actually started life as a primary school teacher. And so today I'm going to tell you a few stories to cover off the very broad topics of digital disruption and sustainability. And I wanted to start with a quote from my friend Larry, who was one of the founders of Google. In 2012, Larry gave a speech where he said, "I organised the world's information and made it truly useful. But every morning, I still burn my toast." And for me, it casts a very poignant observation on the fact that technology, no matter how big or small, is only as good as the problem that it solves, and the efficacy in which it does that. And when we're thinking about digital disruption in this era where trends are formed in weeks and months rather than years and decades, our ability to truly focus on what matters comes into stark focus. And so I thought today I would give you a little bit of look back and look forward using a jobs to be done framework. We love jobs to be done because it helps us to focus on the need that we're fulfilling. What is the sustained problem we're trying to solve over time versus what is the service or product or the function that I'm trying to push out. To Murray's point, those things are far more short-lived these days. So I'm going to start off talking to you about scarcity of resource. So there was a very famous economist called Paul Krugman, and he's a Nobel Prize-winning economist, he's very reputable, but in 1998 he made a very bold assertion. He said, "The internet will fade away because most people do not have enough to say to each other. By 2005, the internet will have added as much impact to the global economy as the fax machine." Now, bold statements from someone who's making a prediction, and the good thing when we're thinking about futures is actually we're looking at possibilities rather than accuracy. But what Paul's comment shows us is our ability to forecast what is happening is really difficult. The internet, in fact, has been pervasive. It has added trillions of dollars to the global economy. And the interesting thing about that is actually this idea that is fueling scarcity. The flywheel effect of a tool that sits purely in the digital realm is now having effects on some very physical things, such as energy, the way we think about jobs, how we're going to produce food in the future, the time we work, and where we work from. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, the impact of our obsession with data and our fascination with the hype cycle of AI, along with other novel technologies such as robotics, IoT, hyperconnectivity, means that we're contributing to an increase of electricity generation of around 170%. That need is not fulfilled, which leads us into this interesting, more human conversation around how might we enable and navigate modern communities. So another very famous person by the name of Cliff Stoll, a very famous astronomer, more famously known as an author. He wrote a book called The Cuckoo's Nest, which has sold many millions. The Cuckoo's Nest is about his experience at Berkeley, where he was asked to find the root cause of a 75-cent anomaly in an accounting practice, which actually led him to pull a very long thread leading to a group of doomed students who were KGB agents. So Cliff, very bright person, also made a bold assertion not unlike our friend Paul. Cliff said, "The truth is, no online database will replace your daily newspaper. No CD-ROM will take the place of an adequate teacher, and the computer network will not change the way that government works." Fast forward to today, and we're looking at these really diverse signals from around the globe of the way that we'll interact with services. Whether we're talking about the modern classroom, whether we're talking about access to health and services, whether we're talking about the extrusion of homes using 3D printers and the ability to crowdsource and share energy to create real prosperity, these things are all tied together by a digital thread. And the interesting concept with this is that inextricably we cannot walk away from the fact that the digital divide, which is prolific in our very small country, is tethered highly to energy poverty. And unless we're able to solve those two things together, our ability to keep pace with change will shift. To put that into context for you, Te Waihanga, our Infrastructure Commission, published a paper not so long ago. It's a couple of years old, so the figures are slightly out of date, that we had a $107 billion infrastructure deficit. That is now extrapolated to be around $209 billion, compounding weekly. We also have, as an example of what it actually means for you, a need for 115,000 more homes, just to have enough, and around the same number of construction workers. And so the opportunity for us to harness the power of digital disruption to create novel ways of doing jobs, to forecast where need is, and to join communities up through electrification and science, combined with digital and creative thinking, is real. Which leads us to this last concept, which is by far the one that is most talked about, which is how do I harness increased pace? Everyone's fascinated by it, and for good reason. The Industrial Revolution, it's not unlike Murray's example, will give us a really, really good kind of baseline for change. If you think about the first Industrial Revolution, the gap to get from Industrial Revolution 1 to 2 was about 104 years. From 2 to 3 was about 86. From 3 to Industrial Revolution 4, which is arguably where we are now, so robotics, IoT, hyperconnectivity, cloud computing, took around 50 years. The projection to get to the next evolution, which the Japanese government came out boldly in 2016, was 20 years, and that it wouldn't be an industrial revolution, it would be a societal revolution. And what's interesting about that is when we think about this idea of pace, yes, those technologies may not be as great in Industry 4.0 as the advent of electricity or mechanisation, but they are pervasive. They touch at consumer level as much as they touch at a business and community level at the same pace, which means the shelf life of a unique idea is getting shorter. The best example I can give you of that is Netflix, which was the golden child of innovation for a long time. When they started in 2007, they were one of 4 players in the streaming landscape, and to be honest, most people thought they were crazy. Why would anyone want anything on demand? If you said that to a child today, they would think you were crazy. If you fast forward to now, there are actually 42 players in the streaming landscape. Because everyone thought Netflix was fabulous. They were so great, they put up a giant billboard all across California actually that said, "Don't give up on your dreams. We started with DVDs." Interestingly, it took Netflix 3.5 years to get to 1 million users. And it took ChatGPT 5 days. So when we're talking about the shelf life of a unique idea, we are inextricably linking and matching enduring need, sustainable need with sustainable solutions with digital disruption, and trying to find a convergence between those two things. And the reality of that is that challenges us at a very human level, not just because we're going to have to adopt new skills and new ways of thinking at pace in a dynamic manner, but we're actually going to need to practice the art of adaptation at a scale that we've never been able to do before. And so I'd like to leave you with a thought. This is a whakatauki which I love deeply. So mate whakatū ka mahoio, mate mahoio ka marama, mate marama ka mātou, mate mātou ka ora. Very crudely translated, what this says is from discussion comes awareness. From awareness, we develop understanding. From understanding, we can grow knowledge, and from knowledge, we can create well-being. So thank you very much for inviting us to be part of the discussion today. My parting thought is the power of digital disruption and sustainability is achieved as a collective and through schools like the UC who provide an opportunity for shared discourse. So thank you.
Ngā mihi mahana all, tēnā koutou katoa, everybody. I'm the social scientist, so I want to talk about some social science stuff. And actually, I only really want to make this... Right, good.
Sorry.
Right, I only really want to make 2 very simple points tonight. But to do that, we're going to have to time travel, right? So, who here remembers 1982? Great. Okay, if we zoom back to 1982, that was a time when New Zealand had just 3 million people, but we had 70 million sheep. Now, as you can imagine, that made us the butt of endless international jokes, right? But by last year, by 2024, our sheep population was down to 25 million, but our people population was at 5 million. Those statistics alone tell you a great deal about how New Zealand has changed. And as much as I would like to talk to you about the sheep, I want to talk to you about the people. Because that 5 million number took demographers by surprise. In fact, it was only 15 years ago that demographers were saying it would be 2050 before we hit 5 million people. And the reason we hit 5 million people so much earlier than anybody thought is because of migration. Migration accounted for half of the growth in New Zealand between 4 and 5 million. We added 500,000 people to New Zealand in less than a decade. And even that number underestimates the impact of migration because we tend to talk about the net number. And in a big year, net New Zealand gains about 150,000 people. But last year, there were 250,000 migrants to New Zealand, offset by 100 who left. Migration has transformed New Zealand. Let's get a show of hands of everybody in this room who wasn't born in New Zealand. Great. My point to you is you haven't seen nothing yet, because migration is just about the only way that our population can grow. And to understand that, we need to take a quick detour to Southeast Asia. And we're going to start in Japan. Some of you have seen this before. If you're in my MBA classes, you've heard me say this before. But in Japan, adult diapers outsell baby diapers.
And they do that because in Japan, people are living longer and they're having fewer kids. 25% of their population is over 65. It's projected to be 40% by 2050. If that figure doesn't blow your mind, try this. In 1963, the Japanese government thought it was a great idea to recognise and celebrate centenarians, people who make it to 100. So they gave them a silver sake cup. It's called a sakazuki, right? And they gave away 153. By 2014, they were giving out 40,000. And it became such a drain on the treasury that the cup you get now is nickel-plated and is much smaller. This year in Japan, there will be 90,000 people who are over 100. That's the first part of the equation. To hear the second part of the equation, we have to detour to South Korea. As you probably all know, for a population to replace itself, you need what's called a total fertility rate of 2.1. Every woman needs, on an average, about 2.1 children to reproduce itself during the childbearing years. That's the target for a population to replace itself. South Korea is at 0.7, and the TFR is falling across the world. New Zealand's not quite that bad, but we're at 1.5. And the point is we have been below replacement level for a long time, and it's getting worse. In the absence of migration, there is no way that New Zealand's population can grow. You put those two trends together, ageing population and what's called a fertility implosion, and you end up with a world that looks like this. Most of you in this room have lived in a New Zealand where there were more young people than old people. That world has come to an end. There are now more people in New Zealand over 65 than there are under 9. My first point is demography is destiny. If you think about the organisation that you're going to lead, the market you're going to be in, the talent you need to attract, to retain, to engage, it's going to look radically different than it does now. You're going to be dealing with a workforce which is much older, much more diverse, and you're going to have to work like hell to attract young talent. Great. First point. Second point, we also have to jump into our time machine. It's not a DeLorean, it's a Bentley Turbo R. Back in 1989, if you made a bit of money on your, not your Tesla shares obviously, but whatever you're investing in 1989, you might have bought one of these. It's what the cool and raffish kids were driving. It's an amazing car. Here's the sociological insight. The 1989 Bentley Turbo R had 5 ashtrays, not a single cup holder, not a single USB charger. If you fast forward to 2024, all the cool kids are now driving EVs. Last year, the best-selling car in the world was the Tesla Model Y. Let's get a show of hands. Who's got a Tesla Model Y? Really? Nobody's got a Tesla Model Y? I don't believe it for a minute. Even if you don't have a Tesla Model Y, you will not be shocked to hear that a Tesla Model Y has precisely 0 ashtrays. It's full of cup holders, and more importantly, it's full of USB chargers. You're going to hear a lot tonight, as you should as leaders, about the transformative power of technology, right? But the bit you might overlook is what is technology doing to the well-being of your workforce and your future workforce? Because starting in about 2010, mental well-being amongst young people has fallen off a cliff across the English-speaking world. This photo breaks my heart. These are my girls in our library, growing up in a house full of books, raised by 2 readers, and if you can't see it, they're both on their devices. This is a really complex question, right? But there is no doubt that smartphones and social media apps are playing a huge role in this mental health crisis. If you have a look at anxiety disorders amongst New Zealand teenagers, you can see that they increase exponentially starting about 2010. The rate at which we dispense antidepressants to teenagers has effectively doubled from 2008 to 2020. I simply can't reiterate for you that there's a cohort of young people who are not doing okay. And if you think about what does anxiety actually show up like in your workplace, it's not just a constant worry about the future. It's also about disengagement. It's about avoidance. It's about a whole lot of other behaviours that you will have to learn how to manage, not if you want to attract people, but if you want to engage them. And this research just gets worse and worse. This is a Treasury report looking at wellbeing trends in New Zealand, pointing to how young people feel incredibly lonely, feel disassociated, and don't even identify with New Zealand. At Truwind Research First, we track loneliness and social connection. And when we do our nationwide survey, what we discover is about 1 in 10 people in your workplace, my workplace, and workplaces across New Zealand say they feel lonely on most days. This is the chronically lonely. These people, less engaged, more likely to be absent, much less likely to be productive. If you move the barrier from most days to often, then the numbers jump up to 37 or 40%. If the first point I want to make is that the demography is destiny, the second point I want to make is the zeitgeist is destiny's child. And if you put those two things together, what it means for you as a leader is the challenge you're going to have in attracting, retaining, and engaging talent is going to be a significant challenge that few workplaces have genuinely engaged with. And I want to end by provoking Elsamari. Because I really like this idea that Gary Turner came up with when he was at Xero. And it was really clear, and I'm really clear, that as important as AI is, the future for you as leaders and business people isn't about AI, it's going to be about your people. Thank you.
Thanks, Carl. And I'm glad you left it there because I want to make a counterpoint, and I want to say the next big thing isn't artificial intelligence, it's people and artificial intelligence. Alrighty, so we were asked to look at some key trends that's going to impact our next year, and we looked at it from different perspectives. So we looked at it from a governance perspective, from social, technological, sustainable. There's of course many other trends, but I thought, in the words of Master Yoda, it's difficult to see. Always in motion is the future. And of course, there isn't just one future, there are multiple futures, and they're all unfolding unevenly in different industries and in different nations. But we also know that top priorities for CEOs, and this has been consistent across the past 3 years, and this is a global survey, is of course growing the bottom line, investing in the right technology, but also making workers more productive. At the same time, and I won't belabor this, I think the points that Carl made of an aging population, a brain drain within New Zealand, but also just younger workers that don't necessarily engage as before, we are absolutely seeing the skills shortage. So it's not a surprise that organizations have turned to artificial intelligence. We haven't seen the return on investment in this space just yet, but the thing is that it's changing so quickly that we'll talk about the changes in a bit, but that it's impacting every part of our lives. So before I jump to that, sorry, I think it's also just a caveat to note that never can we just say, one thing, technology is going to change the world. Of course, it's political, legal, ethical, trust, etc. So focusing on one for a future trend is folly. But let's just look at how this one thing is impacting us. And this was last year. I would argue that last year, everybody had this kind of sentiment, most leaders that I spoke to, and boards as well, were in pitch blackness. All you can do is sit tight until your eyes are used to the dark. Very few people ventured out. This year we've seen a massive change, and shout out to Datacom again for this survey. I loved reading the statistics here, and I want to draw your attention to the first one. It's exciting, I support it. Fewer than 50% of people this year, that shot up to 70%. NZ businesses using any form of AI, 48% last year, shot up to 66%, and many of them, 80%, are seeing a positive impact from that. Now, the problem with AI, though, is that it's had decades on this exponential curve to not impress us, right? AI has been the field of broken promises for many decades, yet we're well and truly in this space of disruption at the moment. And in 2022, something that took a year to advance is now being done in 2 to 3 days. So I'll talk about this pace of change. But I thought, let me show you, might be the easiest. And I gave myself this afternoon 10 minutes in total to do this. But I thought, if I take my bias as a human out of this, how would I write a report on the key trends impacting leaders today? So I'll just show you. I went to Perplexity, and I said, I gave it a question. I said, what are the trends that will impact companies in 2025? I searched the web first, and I got a bunch of reports. And I decided to do exactly the same search, but I did on social. So are there any other kind of social trends going here? And I got a different bunch of reports. I downloaded all of those. This is a free app. I didn't pay for anything. And I also went to ChatGPT, and I said, do this, but I used the web function, and I said, just get me some reports. And I wanted to get, the point was to get as many reports about the trends impacting 2025. Downloaded all of those reports, and I'm just showing you where I got the reports that I downloaded. Now, just to save time, I won't show you how I saved all of them, but I went into Google LM, and I just plonked all the reports I downloaded. I could have put 100 reports in there, I could have put 1,000 reports in there. And I said to it, write me a summary. And what it did was this. It provided a summary. I could have written a study guide, an FAQ, a timeline, a table of contents. But I decided I'll just do an audio overview of the 25 trends. It took 2 minutes, and it created a 20-minute podcast for me. Now, I have no coding skills. It's mostly free. I could have done the ChatGPT. I could have done without the ChatGPT one, but yet I could do this in fewer than 10 minutes. And let me play you a part of that podcast.
Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? You guys sent in some seriously interesting stuff this time around, all about the future of work and leadership. We've got reports from Gartner, analyses of HR trends, even a piece on LinkedIn by John Spence that really got me thinking.
It does seem like all these sources are pointing in the same direction, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like this huge wave of change coming, driven by AI.
AI, yeah. Generative AI specifically. It's everywhere you look these days. Gartner's even put it right at the peak of inflated expectations on their hype cycle.
I won't do the whole podcast. I'll link it to when we post this video. But it's just so uncanny what we can do with these tools now. So that's absolutely the new business context. These previous speakers have spoken about the pace and rate of change, but that uncanniness of change is also incredibly disturbing to our workers, to people in general, and it creates a different type of narrative. Another, just to showcase the uncanniness of change, Tesla released their AI, the Optimus humanoids, and they show how these humanoid robots are going to be watering your plants and walking your dog for you and mowing your lawn, and it's predicted that each house will have at least one. And another incredibly uncanny change this week was HeyGen released a completely interactive avatar. So you can create an avatar, attend thousands of meetings and training sessions at the same time. And it creates a summary for you and action points off of that. That uncanniness of change is incredible. What we're also seeing, though, is with this pace of change, is there is a lack of liminal space. Now, a liminal space is that space between when something changes and we get a chance to rest and recover and recuperate. You've lost a loved one, you mourn, you go through the whole full mourning process, and you get to the other side of it. And that's your liminal space. We see that there's an incredible, there's a lack of liminal space, and that has some implications for leaders. That's what we promised to talk about tonight, and I'll touch on that. But first and foremost is we have to learn while we lead. Gone are the days where we as leaders are experts within the areas, and much of the new things that get introduced are new to us as well. COVID was really good practice ground for this, where I was talking to a CEO recently where he said, you know, during COVID, we would listen to a government announcement about lockdowns or whatever new regulation was passed, and I would have 15 minutes before people phoned me and said, what do we do about this? What's our response? What are we going to tell employees? That absolute learn while we lead and do quickly. We as leaders have to evolve our identities, and if you can't evolve your identity, potentially just really focus on that adaptability piece, but of course also build our own digital literacy. You don't have to be a tech expert, but you need to understand what's going on in the technology space so that you can understand what your employees are grappling with. The stats on how many employees are using these tools versus how many leaders and organizations are truly engaging with them, talking to employees, upskilling, reskilling, is truly shocking. And there are, of course, real implications for employees. Now, I can talk with you for hours about how employees link their social identity to work, and they link it to tasks in various ways. It's the knowing how to do something, and Carl coming to me and saying, Elsamari, can you please do this? And me saying, thank you for doing it, etc. All of those activities in those social contexts are part of our identities, and many of these tasks are being taken away, and it creates a threat environment. But what we would want to see, especially if we solve the productivity problem, is a world where we have augmented, connected workers, where there are digital tools and AI working alongside physical. And what we're focusing on now is, of course, the technology. So how do we train people to use ChatGPT? Not that that's a bad thing, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, our AI course. But what we're focusing on is kind of how do we change workflows and how do we give people technology? But really the foundation of that, before we even go in there, is what we're missing. And that foundation is, how do we build knowledge about the organization, and employees, just general knowledge about how these trends are impacting us. How do we change the roles and organizational structures? A really, really good example of this, earlier this week I was speaking at a Women in Engineering conference where a key digital leader was saying that, you know, a lot of the engineering work, the backroom work, is automated now already. So we're needing to retrain people to be more customer-facing, because the customer still wants to talk to people. But more than anything else, how do we learn and develop people? How do we talk to them around, I don't need you to do this anymore, but I'm going to develop you into being able to do this. Really good example of a local manufacturing company where a key process was automated. That process was awful. It was literally wrapping wire cord around a spool like this every day, all day. There was deep heat all over and people had injuries, etc. But that was automated. Now, that employee has been upskilled and trained to manage that robot, but also presentation skills, other digital literacy skills, etc. So I didn't get the opportunity to talk about many of these negative effects as well: mistrust, distrust, disinformation, etc. But I'm sure you're going to ask some questions about it, which gives me the opportunity to invite the panel back here. Great. Oh, thanks. Ask the first two questions, and for the life of me, I've completely forgotten what they were. I think, who's doing it well, Tracey? That was the first question.
Okay. Okay. Well, globally, there's lots of players. I think, and I can give you examples, and I will. But I think the underlying thing, going back to your presentation, actually, is what's the process or use case or impact that you're trying to create. Where we're seeing adoption of technology really fail, actually IoT was a good example of this. There were, I think it was the statistics, about 60% of IoT projects don't get past proof of concept, because the ability to actually demonstrate return on investment and that it was better to do it with a complex network of sensors and data and hyperconnectivity was better than having someone go out and measure the water in a river or whatever it might be, was actually really difficult to prove. So the research that Elsamari shared a snapshot of actually understanding your baseline and what you're trying to shift to before you go down the technological route is hugely important. And so productivity is a really interesting one. If you think about Copilot and the advent of that with Microsoft, the early adopter program, one of the huge pieces of feedback that came back from that was, well, we didn't actually know if it was better, because what was your definition of productivity to start off with? And so in the knowledge work industry, that's actually really difficult. In more traditional industries like manufacturing, agriculture, construction, that are measured through output and throughput, it's much simpler. So interestingly to the question, sorry, long answer, the automotive industry is doing fantastically when it comes to adoption of AI, and it is through the convergence of AI and robotics. So very much to your example, a lot around health and safety, and interestingly around creating equity in the workforce. So being able to pick up people with long-standing injuries, so I can't lift my arm above a certain point, but in order to put a nut on a camshaft as part of a vehicle production assembly, I need to be able to do that. GM's developed a robot called Robbie that performs that task for their workers to create equity and equal employment opportunity. There are many examples across more factory-based industries where it's to solve for health and safety. The RSI thing is huge. But what I'd say is there's an unintended consequence of all of these things. Most people who have not come from a knowledge work base, like the four of us and probably many of you sitting out there, aren't used to working in situations of quality assurance or interpretation of data or looking at a screen. And the cognitive load associated with working in a very high-tech environment is incredibly high. In fact, we built agents for our payroll solution, and one of the developers there released multiple features in a week. And on Thursday afternoon, said to his boss, I'm absolutely hooked. Like, I just can't do anything else because the amount of processing and just mental load that he created was great. And this is someone in a knowledge work situation. So I think there are examples and use cases of it being done very well, where you're deliberate around the use case and the problem that you're trying to solve for, and it inextricably has a person associated with it. But what we're not seeing pervasively be done well is understanding the unintended consequences of shifting the way that somebody works, particularly from a psychological point of view and a physical well-being point of view.
Cool. Thank you. Given everything that was discussed tonight, how do we respond as leaders? Mary, you start.
Thanks, Els. Look, I think there's a couple of markers that I would throw out to you. And these are the sorts of the barriers and impediments to change. So as a leader, we need to be tuned in to some of the things that we can see that should be red flags for us. And if I was going to borrow from evolutionary biology as an adjunct to Carl's social science bent, it would be that most organisations have their own immune system. And they manifest themselves in a number of ways. There's malicious compliance, so I'll do it, but I'll do it slowly. There's benign ambush, so I'll set a couple of tripwires, maybe lob a few grenades as I head out the door to drinks on a lovely Thursday afternoon in Christchurch at 5:30. And those things happen by stealth, but being aware of them is critical. The other thing for leaders is that there's a very formal organisational immune system often at play as well. And when you're dealing with change and transformation, it sort of looks a bit like this. So we have a new vision and a new purpose and a new investment landscape to give us the chance to build a new organisation, a new way of operating, a new customer base, whatever it might be. But we will only report against that against existing business metrics and analysis. So if we're doing that, and we're not reporting against the transformation and change metrics, the organisation is essentially starting to eat away at itself. And the second one sort of involves three key elements: money, capability, and time. And if organisations are starved of any one of those three resources in a transformation and change program, you will not succeed. So it requires, again, if I reference back to my earlier comments, an understanding of risk appetite, an understanding of the investment capability and quantum that's required to get you where you want to, and then developing some quite specific strategies around dealing with the immune system, but also recognising that things like M&A strategy, merger and acquisition, is going to become more of an element of sustainability in the future, simply because we cannot afford to take, to your point, the diminishing time frame of a unique idea and invest in it in a way that we would normally have done. So if we disinvest, reallocate resource and have an aggressive M&A strategy, then we have a much better chance of success as leaders. I'm sure Carl's got some other stuff to...
Yeah, I mean, what we're having a conversation about here is the meaning and purpose of work. Like, if we really reflect on transformation, we actually have to have a conversation about what does work do for us. And that's a great conversation about what does work look like. I was struck by your comment about the cognitive load that your programmer. I often say, imagine if we designed workplaces which were psychologically sophisticated. It seems to me that one of the great lies that sits at the heart of all our organisations is that if you work for 37.5 hours a week and I have access to your calendar, then I'm going to get the same you at any day or across at any time you're at work, right? If I book a meeting with you at 4 o'clock on a Thursday, you're getting paid the same as if I'm talking to you at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday. But clearly, human beings don't work like that. And I love your point about respecting the humanity of cognitive work, thinking about what does that mean. All of these things have profound challenges for the way we structure work. But they also have profound challenges for you guys as leaders, because often leaders might want to talk about the well-being of their team, but really want to talk about the well-being of themselves.
Do you want to add something?
Yeah, I'm just... A piece of advice would be try and do only one impossible thing at a time. Because the expectations are real and they're difficult. And the saddest place in the world is the chasm between aspiration and reality. So don't overcook yourselves. Actually give yourselves the chance to be successful. But be single-minded, and if you can do that and operate in a way that sort of generates collective efficacy across your organisation, you will have a much, much greater chance of success.
I'm maybe stitching between the two of you. The measurement piece and the wellbeing piece, I think, is so closely tethered. So about 30 years ago, to your point around measurement not changing, a guy called John Elkington developed a construct called a triple bottom line. So you would measure things by people, planet and profit. And it came from this place of absolute goodness around well-being and humanity, that actually you can't measure impact through a singular lens, particularly in this rate of exponential change. And then very depressingly, in 2018, he came out and said it totally failed, because all it allowed, it's a very good article, it's in Harvard Business Review, I recommend reading it. He basically said what it allowed leaders to do was it gave them permission to use it as a measurement tool rather than as a way to design the outcomes they were seeking. And that heart of transformation is actually understanding the shift that you're trying to create, not necessarily what the solution is. And so one of the challenges we have in a rapidly evolved landscape is how do we move from a triple bottom line measurement into a triple top line, where those ideas of experience and ecosystem and economics, because it's true for not-for-profits as well as enterprise, how do you create cohesiveness between those for sustained real impact, I think is key.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is, you get a bit of a BS detector radar thing that starts to happen. We got it all right first time, the strategy was right, the leadership was right. We didn't spend too much time worrying about the tech, said no one ever. So being quite simple-minded about the things that are going to be the most important levers for you to pull as leaders to affect that change is critical. So give yourself the time to think and discuss and build that collective efficacy across your organisation, and the chance of success will grow with it.
I think that why is so important. I've rarely seen a digital transformation where, you know, that vision is everybody will use ChatGPT, for lack of a better example, in the organisation. You know, it's always that human-centric why that makes these initiatives successful. Yeah.
But this is that notion of thinking right to left that I think comes in the MBA really well. You know,
Yeah.
you can start thinking about what are our resources, what are our activities, what are our outputs and outcomes. But actually, you should be starting to think with what's the impact we want to achieve, and then let's work backwards. So we think right to left, not left to right.
Well, I think it's time for some questions from the audience. Oh, great. And there was, Edison's going to run around. Thank you. Edison, here's a question right at the start. Thank you.
So it's a question that starts with demographics that may actually address the other issues. Given the outcome of yesterday's election, should we, this is maybe an opportunity to roll out the red carpet, the welcome mat, to lots of American professionals, investors who are cashed up, experienced, ready to go. Is that an opportunity?
Look, the short answer is yes. In fact, I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine last night who is a former admiral in the Australian Navy, and he has already had contact from his former naval colleagues about moving to Australia to go and work for Mel in the International Maritime College. So it's coming, and we would be silly not to.
Yeah, but I think it speaks to what we're all talking about tonight. Like, you've got to ask the question, why would they come? Running away from Trump might be sufficient motivation for now, but we're in a war for talent with the rest of the world, right? And our productivity is falling behind, and our digital uptake isn't as great as our neighbours. Like, we have to make a much better proposition. What is it that Callahan said? Making the place where talent wants to live? I mean, that's got to be the goal, right?
Thank you. There we go.
And there's one up the back too.
Right.
Somebody's going to bang a long steps up there.
Carl, your presentation triggered this question. You talked about our population increase thanks to immigration and birth rates decreasing, and the challenges that presents, and attracting and retaining talent, and the negative impacts of that. Now, excuse my ignorance, perhaps did you have any comments around the positive impacts from reduced populations in terms of, say, our consumption of natural resources, renewable, non-renewable resources, and waste? So perhaps smaller populations, could that be a good thing?
First of all, thanks for using the word triggered. I'm still triggered. There's a thing called secular stagnation, which is exactly what Japan's facing. And while it's absolutely true that a smaller population will have fewer impacts on the environment, before we get to the sustainability benefits, we're going to run up against a whole lot of economic disbenefits. And one of the reasons that the Japanese economy has stagnated so badly is there's so many old people that don't need to buy anything. So as long as we have an economy that's built on consumption, production and exporting, before we hit those benefits of the smaller population, we're going to run into a whole lot of trouble.
I just, maybe on the demographic side of it, by 2030, 50% of the population will continue to live in the 5 major centres. And everybody knows that, and that's very obvious. But what it doesn't really break down is the difference between living regionally and rurally. And by 2040, it's expected that somewhere between 46 and 48% of our population will be Māori and Pacifica. So whilst Pākehā are definitely not having as many babies, that is not true for the rest of our population and our broader whānau. And so I think part of this is actually deeply understanding, well, where will people live and what will that change for work. And if I look at some of the research that's been done with Scion, which is a forestry research in the North Island in conjunction with Lincoln around te ao Māori practices and prevention of things like Kauri dieback. That whole thing around aquaculture and agri-tech will exist in areas of our country that have not typically been populous, and they will have an economic benefit if we lean more into cultural practices and kind of acknowledge the demographic that we already have whilst it's supplemented with immigration. So I think that's a multifaceted question.
I mean, it's a really good point. It picks up almost on Murray's point about we need a long-term investment infrastructure strategy. We need a long-term population strategy. I mean, 50% of New Zealand's population is going to be living within 80 kilometres of Queen Street, which is a disaster for the rest of us. So thinking about how do we actually get a genuine nationwide population strategy is really important.
Right, I think he has a microphone, Edison.
Yeah, firstly, can I congratulate you all? I think as much as we all embrace technology, I think you met the test tonight that if the PowerPoint wasn't working, you were all able to engage with us. One of the things that I heard is the problem with AI, and I've actually texted this to you, Carl, and I'd like to read it out and get a response from each of the panellists whether they agree. The real issue with AI isn't AI itself, it's how we choose to use it. AI, much like any powerful tool, holds immense potential for both positive and negative outcomes depending on how it's applied. I use the analogy, the arrival of electricity. When we screw in a light bulb into a socket, it brings light and productivity to our lives. Poke your fingers in the same socket and it's electrifying. So my comment is that technology is neutral. It's human choice and actions that determine whether the impact will be beneficial or harmful. In the same way, AI can either enhance our lives or pose risks, depending on our intent, oversight, and ethical standards in its deployment. And I'd be interested whether you agree or disagree with those comments.
Well, hey David, it's good to see you. I'm going to let these guys talk about AI, but when I think about the teen mental health thing, I think the problem is we're letting our kids not just poke their fingers in that socket that you talked about, but lick it. And it seems to me that that's going to be a public health problem if we're not very careful.
I'll take it from answer the question maybe from a work point of view, if that's okay. There's a good quote from a play, which is, how do you go bankrupt? And the response is gradually and then suddenly. And I feel like the thing with AI is it was, to Elsamari's excellent explanation, it was coming for a long time with machine learning, but nobody really understood what this kind of rapid rate of generative technology would do, and it's just kind of smacked us in the face. And we don't necessarily have the scaffolds around us to keep us safe, and I think that fundamentally challenges people's sense of contribution. What is it that allows them to feel value? So safe to be me, know my purpose, provide a sense of safety. How do I create value? So make connections, apply learning and take actions, and then how do I receive value? So enable me and what I'm working on and who I'm working with. That really simple kind of create, receive, feel value ecosystem is really challenged when you can insert a tool at any point and it changes your sense of contribution in spite of yourself. And so there is a challenge for us as leaders, particularly in the strategy space, as Murray, you've talked about so eloquently, to say, what are those mechanisms that we need to build for the next generation of learners and workers so that they have a sense of value in the work that they do. And if we're not smart in doing that, they gradually then suddenly think will just fall off a cliff. So
I'll just add two little bits. The first is pernicious polarisation. And Carl and I were at university doing political science together in the mid-80s, so it gives you a sense of how old we are. But what we are seeing is that with a whole bunch of tools, confirmation bias is being absolutely fed and is drinking from the fire hydrant. So the algorithms that are in the back of a lot of this sort of stuff, and I'll defer to Els for the next part of the answer, run the risk of further polarising workforces, families, jurisdictions, and parts of the world. So I think there's a very strong ethical requirement that we need to think carefully about as this develops, but we have to do it fast.
And I think your point about the light bulb and artificial light was very eloquently made. And if we think back to artificial light, it really made us incredibly productive, but it also had a bunch of other amazing benefits. Women came into the workforce, etc. Lots of benefits, but also physiologically we worked longer than we should. We know that natural light is better for us, for our circadian rhythms, etc. So, but that was only realized over time. Now the problem with AI, so well summarized, is that all technology is evil and all technology is good. And before though, there were a few players that controlled and could put some clear guardrails around it. The problem with generative AI at the moment is that anybody can play with those tools, right? It's completely democratized. And while we would hope that everybody has good moral standing, etc., we know that that's not true. And I think that is something that we have to face. But I also want to say that I've been reflecting on, is AI just a symptom of our society versus us bringing in this tool? If I was chatting to Carl because I follow the loneliness work that they do, and I said to him, I checked today, what are the top 50 most used AI apps, Gen AI apps, in the past month by unique clicks? And 7 of those are relational apps where you have a relationship with an AI or you talk to a character. So I also think, it's so incredibly complex, but it's also an answer to some of the deep issues that we have at the moment. Information overload. I cannot wait for an agent to start answering my emails. Then people would actually hear back from me. It would be great. So it's so complex, but we are hanging on to people's goodwill and hoping that there aren't too many malicious agents out there.
In my experience, hope is never a strategy.
Yep. Yeah. I think we'll do one more question. No, I totally agree with you. Oh, Mary. You go, Mary.
Thank you. This is possibly for Tracey, maybe Elsa, and maybe Mari. So we've talked about how there's a huge drive for businesses to adapt and use AI, but there's also a competing huge drive and also a mandate for a lot of businesses who are, say, B Corp certified or a lot of organisations aiming for that 2050 net carbon. How do you see that huge energy requirement for AI competing with companies' mandates and requirements to be net carbon neutral?
You go.
So I can proudly say that our data centres are currently neutral and will be net zero by 2030. So look, I think it's a complex question because it's like a supply chain. Everybody goes, you've got AI and energy consumption and those things are just tethered together through the hyperscalers, and it's not true. There is a heap in there, like anything around chip manufacture and the devices that you're accessing. And so like all Scope 1, 2 and the more complex Scope 3 emissions that you're tethering to here, you need to understand those things that are outside of your control. And part of this comes to how do you procure and what are your standards around these things to deeply understand that. What I would say is that globally there is a heap of work that has been pushed into renewables because of this. Some of it debatable. Nuclear fusion is the current hot topic with all of the hyperscalers, which is worrying. But I was reading the other day about algae as a renewable energy source. the way that they're looking at harvesting chips, what the processing power is and the size, there's no longer life, which means you don't need as many. So that entire supply chain around the use of AI is key. I think from an organisation's point of view though, understanding where you apply that for impact is still key, right? Like you can't trade off digital transformation and innovation and sustainability against each other. And what we're seeing is sustainability moves outside of just energy when it comes to AI into some of the more complex topics we've talked about around ethics and bias and policy and charters. So the single biggest risk at the moment that we see in New Zealand organisations is those that are taking a policy standpoint to start, because they're constraining what they're able to do and isolating the workforce, versus those that are taking either incubation, do one thing, do it well, or build a charter point of view to actually be able to measure some of those things. The idea that we understand the impact just because there's global stats is just a fallacy. So part of it, I think, is organisations, one, having the strategy, two, understanding scope 3 and where they sit on that universally, and then thirdly, understanding how they want to apply it so they can create a baseline and measure to improve over time. But it's not going to be static. You know, like it's going to need to be an evergreen approach to building that within your structure.
I'll just focus quickly then, very narrowly on that carbon footprint of AI. I think what's happening in organisations is organisations that are kind of scurrying to adopt, it's spotlighting bad practices around data, and we're just not going to be able to get away with those bad practices. Storing data we don't need for decades and decades, running algorithms that every day that people just need access to once a month, those types of practices. So I think in order for it to be an and more, because I totally think that good practices around, well, essentially business architecture, if you do good practice around sustainability, security, data infrastructure, then all of these other technologies there will be a net benefit in terms of carbon emissions. But at the moment, it is more taxing to run a Perplexity search than it is to run a Google search. Yeah, cool. Alrighty, I am very cognizant. I know that everybody wants to ask questions, but we'll hang around afterwards. I just want to finish off and say a big thank you to our panelists and a save the date for our next one, 27th of Feb. We have Dr. Stacey Wood from NC State Poole College of Management and Dr. Brian Bollinger from New York Stern School of Business. Brian's #1 in sustainability in the world. And Stacey is an absolute rock star that looks at transformation of healthcare and AI, etc. So save the date. Come along on the 27th of Feb next year and enjoy your festive season. Join us for drinks and nibbles afterwards. Thank you, everyone.